Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I'm just sitting here in my robe drinking my morning coffee looking sexy as hell as usual. And for those of you who say I don't look sexy as hell when I do these videos in my robe, nobody cares what you think. I didn't ask you shit. Now, I obviously talk with a lot of other people who have YouTube channels in the fitness world, training world, things like that. And we kind of talk about things, and one of the things that we talk about is the way that our critics, or even fans, and people make comments on our fan pages, comments in the videos, criticisms we get on forums. And one of the biggest problems that we run into is that when people are being critical of things that we say, unfortunately, a large percentage of people, like a third of the population, have a lower intellect, lower intelligence, lower critical thinking skills, and listening ability than average. That's why they're in the bottom 30%. And unfortunately, those people have access to the internet. The problem is that oftentimes those people make an assessment, they voice their opinion, and then other people who are more intelligent than them hear it, and then they in turn develop that same opinion. Well, here's the problem with that. People with lower levels of intelligence tend to view things into hard black and white categories, either or categories. They have oftentimes very black and white thinking, meaning something is either good or something is bad. Someone is either for it or someone is against it. So if someone says, I generally like low rep training for most trainees and purposes, what they hear is, I think low rep training is good and high rep training is bad. Was never said or implied. Same thing with high volume, low volume, or with dieting, high carb versus low carb, high fat versus low fat. People hear someone say something and they assume that it means that person is purely in that area, and oftentimes we are not. A lot of us who really do know a lot about this stuff, who aren't dogmatic about it, we have these things, but we see these things as tools. And we're trying to explain to people that you need to pick the right tool for the job, and the right tool is going to change from time to time. For example, I could take one person and there'd be periods of time where I would put them on an ultra high carb diet with low fat, but that same person might do better when they're cutting on lower carbs and more moderate or even high fat due to satiation. Because when it comes to things like cutting, what really matters is balancing out your satiation and your energy with the rate of fat loss that you actually want to achieve. That's the hardest thing, and people's satiation and energy levels and appetite vary tremendously based upon different amounts of carbs, fat, protein, fiber. That isn't a constant. There are people who can't do a low carb diet with high fat because they get too hungry and they end up overeating, and they screw their diet up. Same with some people if they try to run really high carbs when they're cutting, just the way their appetite works. They might have a little more energy in the gym when they train from it, but their appetite becomes a problem and they overeat. So when you come to things like cutting like that, it's about energy turnover when you're trying to lose fat. So obviously you're going to have to look at what's going to keep someone consistent as an individual. When it comes to training, even for a strength athlete, it may not be appropriate to run ultra low reps year round. In fact, it might hinder their progress because you're going to need to regulate things like volume, intensity, frequency, workload. Because what happens is that no one can make a linear progression forever. You can't just keep adding weight to the bar doing the same thing indefinitely. They can't use that method. They'll have to rotate through things. And so when you get into that situation, what becomes good or bad isn't high volume versus low volume, high reps versus low reps. It becomes what's going to help me make the most consistent progress. And none of those are good or bad. They're all useful tools. Even volume becomes that way. There are situations to where increasing your volume will absolutely increase strength, muscle size, everything. Absolutely. And then after a certain threshold, if you maintain that volume, that additional volume gives you no more adaptation at all. Zero, nothing. So is increasing volume good or bad? Well, it's good at the right times. It's extremely good. At other times, it becomes worthless. But people don't understand that. When we discuss these things, they don't seem to understand that we're talking about using the appropriate tools in the right time. And just because we might prefer something most of the time doesn't mean that we're against the opposite approach. Just like I've oftentimes been accused of saying that I believe in only compounds and I'm an exercise minimalist, yet my novice program has a tons of exercises, has multiple isolation movements. You guys have seen me in my training, in videos I've done over time, particularly even on the old channel, there was a lot of training clips up. You guys see me doing at least 3 different types of curls. You guys have seen me do at least 3 different types of tricep extensions, flies, lateral raises, base pulls, shrugs. So if I do something myself and programs I write have something in it, I'm certainly not against it. I am, however, very in favor of using predominantly compound exercises for your goals, no matter what you compete in or what your training goals are. They should always be your bread and butter and your foundation, and things like isolation movements should be used at the appropriate time in the appropriate context to achieve your goal. So people don't always understand these things, and they get caught up in this black and white thinking. And what I would suggest a lot of you do when you see these criticisms of someone, don't assume that the dumbass who's saying the thing is actually right in what that person's stance is. Don't be that stupid person. And in fact, I would tell a lot of you that a person can make themselves more intelligent. They can improve their critical thinking skills just by using them, even if they're not an extremely intelligent person. And not everyone is intelligent. A lot of you out there know that you might be average or slightly below average. But that doesn't mean that you can't develop better critical thinking skills. And by stepping back and saying, well, wait a minute, this person said this, but is that really, what the way I'm interpreting, is that really what they mean? What are they actually trying to say? That would be using a critical thinking skills. And if you practice those things, you will get better at it. And you will actually improve your ability to think, which in turn will make you more intelligent than you were in the past if you just work on those sort of things. And it's something I would advise people to do when a lot of people on these channels, we make these statements. Step back and ask, wait, what did he actually say? Did he actually say and mean what I had originally interpreted as, or what some dumbass on a forum interpreted him as saying? All right, guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.